Okay, good evening, everyone. Before I forget, sorry, I was just saying to Adam, so Sunday I'm not coming to share, I'm away. I'm out of town Sunday, so but I would like us to hopefully at least finish Tosis for today or by Sunday at least, tough Tosis. So I just want to reiterate or repeat what I said on last Sunday. I don't want to go into too much detail because there's quite a lot. Even just trying to focus on Tosis alone, on Tosis Ramaskel High Paga Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph is pretty complicated, and if one gets overly sucked into Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, it becomes yet more difficult. And part of the challenge over here is a confusion of terminology and semantics, which we can't get caught up into. It's too caught up into either. But for the purposes of our discussion, there are a number of ways of moving a non-Muktza item and agav that moving a Muktza item, which we'll generically call types of Titul min HaTsad. And Tosis is only comprehensible if one understands that there's no one-size-fits-all Titul min HaTsad. Different scenarios have different statuses. We already sort of seen that in our Gemara alone, because our Gemara tells us that Paga SheTamna BaTeven, if it's Megula Miktos and Mutter Nataltala, and Rashi already says there, he says, because that's nothing. In other words, even though maybe the Othar is sliding off when you lift it, or the vacuum created through taking it away means that the Gacheres or the Teven moves, that says Rashi is nothing. So that's scenario number one, where Muktza is moved somewhat by moving non-Muktza, and that's no issue at all, and even the Tanna Kamma thinks it's okay. We can argue over terminology, but it's a title Titul min HaTsad in the sense that a Muktza item is being moved, but that's Lo Shmei Titul. That's not. It's even less than Lo Shmei Titul. There's no Titul there at all, and that's okay. Then we have Rabbi Zobin Tadoi, who's Machadesh that. You can even move them. Let's go like Rashi. Let's leave the other Rishonim and maybe let's go in the simplest reading. So he says that you can move the chaburah or the Paga and lift up with that some gacheres or teven, and that's Titul min HaTsad Lo Shmei Titul. That's his view. Then that's the psak of Rav Nachman, Titul min HaTsad Lo Shmei Titul, or yes Titul. And from Tosfos, it emerges that even within that, there's different categories. Tosfos talks about something which is called Titul Gomor, and when you look at Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph and in Tosfos himself, it's clear that Titul Gomor here simply Kuf Mem Beis Amud, I'm sorry. Titul Gomor here means also an indirect form of Titul. I'm lifting up the Chovis, but since I care where the Even goes or where the Kiss Shalma'os goes, Tosfos refers to that as a Titul Gomor. So it's another scenario of only indirectly moving the Muktza, but that's a more severe scenario of indirectly moving the Muktza, which is referred to as Titul Gomor. Now, I very rarely ask you to take me on trust, but in this case here, I'm asking you to take me on trust. In other words, that is what Titul Gomor means. I appreciate that's not. When you look at Tosfos' language of Titul Gomor, it sounds like he's saying you're directly moving it. But when you're ma'ayin in the very difficult sukkah of Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph, this is what it means. It means whether the semantics are correct or not, but it means you're moving it through another object, which for our purposes we'll call a very strict case of Titul min HaTsad. I don't want to go into this now, other than to say that Elio, after the Shiur and then off group again, was challenging me about my reading in Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph, and I spent a lot of time again on it, and I'm convinced this is right. But I appreciate that it may not be instinctively what you read by the words Titul Gomor. I just want to save everyone from getting caught up in a very tough sugya in Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. We'll get to there in good time. At the rate we're going, probably in several years' time. But we will get to one day, hopefully, Mitzvah Hashem will all have discussed with Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. And for now, I'm going with that reading. And from my point of view, it's non-negotiable that the Titul Gomor of Tosfos means Titul, a type of Titul min HaTsad, or maybe more severe than regular Titul min HaTsad. But the point is that mechanically, what you're doing is you're moving the Chovis, and the Even is sitting on top of it and gets moved, or you're moving the Mitzvah, and the kiss that's sitting on top of it gets moved. And unlike our scenario of Titul and HaTsad, where the Muktza is getting moved, but you don't care about the Muktza, in this case, the Evan and the kiss is getting moved, and you do care about the Evan and the kiss. And therefore, that's a more severe type of Titul and HaTsad, because you are engaging with the Muktza. In the case of the fruit or the chaburah, you just want the coal or the teven to fall off. You have no interest in it. And that's really this is really what Rabbi Zobin says. He says you can lift it up and they fall off by themselves, and I don't care. He doesn't. This isn't the normal Shiur of the Gemara. Shiur is where it literally falls off, like the Tanakama, where part of it is Megullah, and you're not doing any direct movement at all. It just falls off straight away. Rabbi Zobin says Titul and HaTsad is allowed, even though you are lifting the coal or the teven, because you have no interest in it, and therefore that's a more lenient form of Titul and HaTsad. And then we have a yet stricter type of, we can call it Titul and HaTsad, which is called Titul Gomor, where you are moving the Evan or the kiss through moving non-Muktza items, and nonetheless, it doesn't have nonetheless it's more severe because I'm planning and intending to move both. That's an even worse type of Titul and HaTsad, because there all you're doing is trying to move the mace. So that's a yet stricter form of that. So if we want to lay out the hierarchy of Titul and HaTsad, we have the mitzvah with the mace on it, where your whole intention is to move the mace. And there the Rishonim, though not Tosfos, said that was a Titul and HaTsad, which everyone would agree was Asa. Then we have the Gemara and Kuf Mem base on a base, in which I'm moving the mitzvah, but I also want to move the kiss, or I also want to move the Evan, because I don't want them to fall anywhere. I don't want them to just fall off. Kuf Mem base on base. The printer that wrote Kuf Mem Aleph on Dalef is a mistake. Yeah, it's Kuf Mem is a mistake. I don't know, in my print I've got an old Vilna print. It's my printer wrote Kuf Mem Aleph on Dalef, that's a mistake. It doesn't exist there. So that's Titul. Tosfos refers to that as Titul Gomor, and that's a less ideal Titul and HaTsad. Then you have classic Titul and HaTsad, which is I am lifting up a Muktza item, but I have no interest in lifting up the Muktza item. And then I have Shiur, where I'm just literally, it's just falling off straight away, which is yet more lenient. That's the hierarchy of scenarios. And confusingly, there's the terminology Titul and HaTsad floats around perhaps for all of them. But in Tosfos, it's clear that that's the maths, that these are different levels. What Tosfos calls Titul Gomor, whether it's technically correct to call that Titul and HaTsad or not, is getting caught up in words. But it's certainly a case where you are only indirectly moving it. And nonetheless, that's more strict because it's a type of Titul Gomor, even though I'm only moving it indirectly. Now, that's the first Hakdam in Tosfos. The second Hakdam in Tosfos is that Tosfos is very, very difficult to read. But we're going to read the Tosfos like the Mashal. And in that reading, the following emerges. Ostensibly, so the first point the Mashal makes is that this is a Tosfos that's asking a question on Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman's and Amoran shouldn't be arguing the Mishnah. It doesn't ask on the Bryce of the Rabban and Rabbizobin because those are Tanoim and they don't have to worry about Mishnahs. Okay. But in the Mashal's reading, what Tosfos is doing is effectively linking what we would have thought was two disparate and separate halachic discussions. So again, pre-Tosfos, I always thought, one halachic thing I need to work out is the non-Muktza under object a bossis for the Muktza over object that's sitting on it? So I have a tray with Muktza on it. I have to work out if the tray is a bossis. If the tray is a bossis, then effectively it becomes Muktza in its own right. In which case, the whole lomdus of Titul and HaTsad and so on is irrelevant, because even if I'm only moving the under object, and by that moving the over object, the under object itself is bossis and therefore Muktza. That's one halachic thing I have to work through. Then, number two, if I work out that it's not a bossis, so good, I've resolved the issue of moving the under object, but I'm also moving the older object, agav, incidentally, or min HaTsad. So can I do that when I'm incidentally moving the over object, which is Muktza, by moving the under object, which is not Muktza? And that's the sugya of Titul and HaTsad and all other scenarios. Two separate halachic discussions. In Tosfos, it's clear, at least according to the Mashal's reading, that the whole sort of chiddush that Tosfos is innovating for us and teaching us to think differently is to merge these two halachic concepts. And the logic behind it is because the whole svara of indirect Titul and HaTsad, or Titul agav, or whatever label you give it, is that you're not so directly engaging with the Muktza item. But if the Muktza item is a bossis to some degree or other, then I am more directly engaging with the Muktza item also, and therefore the halachas of Titul and HaTsad are affected. And if you crunch the maths of Tosfos, comes out that effectively Tosfos is saying there's several layers. There's in principle 3 layers. If it is what Tosfos calls Titul Gomor, translation, I'm moving a non-Muktza item, and through that also moving a Muktza item, and intentionally want the Muktza item to move, like the case of the kiss, the purse, or the Evan. And again, when you look at the Gemara, the point is you don't want the purse to fall anywhere, you don't want the Evan to fall anywhere. So I'm deliberately moving it. Then this is Osa, unless it's a scenario of Shecheach. So only if the upper object was never meant to be there in the first place, it was Shochach, I forgot it, but I never wanted it to be there on Shabbos at all, then only then would there be room to allow that case. So even though Shochach is a svara in bosses, nonetheless, Tosfos says it also affects how we apply the rules of moving of A agav B, A incidentally of B. So I want to move the chavis, which is a non-Muktza item. I might think that Shochach or not Shochach is simply a svara in bosses. So Tosfos says no, it affects also whether I can move the Evan agav the Muktza item. If it was Shochach, in other words, there's no depth of relationship between the chavis and the stone, then it's mutter. But if it's not Shochach, then it's also because I can't help but connect the two in my action. In other words, if I was meniach, I did place the stone on the chavis deliberately, or I placed the purse, the mois, on the mitzvah deliberately, even though it didn't become a bossis because I didn't intend to leave it there and I had a plan to take it off, nonetheless, I created a connection between the two, and therefore I can't claim that my moving of the non-Muktza item is completely incidental. I can't say my actions in the chavis, and what can I do? I just, the stone is being dragged along with it, the kiss is being dragged along with it, and therefore my action relates to it. So what Tosfos calls Titul Gomor, translation, moving Muktza by moving non-Muktza, but where I also want to move the Muktza, Tosfos says that's only mutter in the case of Shochach, where there's no relationship between the Muktza item and the non-Muktza item other than geographically, physically, one was sitting on top of the other one. But in no way did I ever intend to link the two, at least not for Shabbos, and therefore that would be mutter. Then Tosfos says that the opposite extreme, which is Niur, in other words, there's no Titul min HaTsad at all. It's just what Rashi calls no Titul whatsoever. It's just the things falling off it as I lift it, but there's no proper elevation that occurs. Tosfos says that would be allowed even by Maniach, where it doesn't become a bossis. In other words, whereas Maniach al Manas little. So I avoid the issue of the under object being Muktza, because there's no bosses there, but it's still a Maniach, there's still a relationship between the two, and therefore only Niur would be allowed. And finally, the machlokas Rabbanon and Rabbizobin ben Todoi is in the case of Paga or Harara, or by extension Pugla, which the Gemara links in terms of Nachman. That's in a case where I'm doing a genuine Titul min HaTsad. It's worse than Niur because I am lifting up. It's Mechusa, it's not Megula. In other words, I am lifting up the Teven or the Gacheles or the dust where the Paga, Charara are buried. So it's not just Niur, it's genuinely lifting up. On the other hand, it's not Titul Gomor. I'm not trying to move the wallet or the purse or the stone around. And in that case, that's really the machlokas, Rabbizobin Todoi and the Rabbanon and Rav Nachman's Pesach about whether that would be allowed in the case of Maniach. That's what comes out in the maths of Tosfos. So to summarize, the whole machlokas of whether Titul min HaTsad shmei Titul or lav shmei Titul in our Gemara is really a much more subtle machlokas. What it really means to say is a Titul min HaTsad translation. It's not a Niur on the one extreme, it's the Goldilocks zone. It's not Niur, which is just flippant, I'm just flipping it over and it's coming off. It's not a case where I'm genuinely also trying to move the Muktza agav the non-Muktza, but it's Titul min HaTsad. I'm genuinely moving the Muktza, but I have no particular engagement with it. Is that allowed in a case of Maniach? That's the maths of Tosfos according to the Marsha. So it's a very specific, fine-tuned machlokas about Titul min HaTsad, rather than this very broad brushstroke machlokas that we originally thought it was. That's what comes out in Tosus. I apologize. I have no way of making it clear what I've just done. That's the math of Tosus, and it takes quite a lot of working through just to get it out. Yeah, if it's maniach with intention to leave it, it's a bossis. The whole sugya doesn't start because the under object has become Muktza also. It's been called infected. It's become the bottle somehow. It's become a bossis to the Muktza. This is maniach amanas little. It hasn't become a bossis. On the other hand, there is a relationship between the two objects as maniach, and therefore that would be the machlokas of Rabbizobin and Tanakama.
Not bosses in cases, it's not serving.
Correct. Yes, that is an entirely accurate point. Yes, it's not completely not serving it. It is. I was maniach it, but I didn't intend to leave it there. In other words, the Ritva says it's not a bosses at all. Yeah, the Ritva circumvents. Correct. The Ritva circumvents the whole thing because he says it was never the base of it. On the contrary, it was serving thing. Correct. There's no bosses whatsoever because as the Ritva points out, Correct. Yes. Once the Ritva, there's no relationship between the gacheles and the teven and the fruit, because on the contrary, no bittul relationship, no bosses relationship, because I'm not using the fruit to serve the teven. On the contrary, I'm using the teven to ripen the fruit, or the gacheles to bake the chaburah. Yes. So when the Ritva doesn't start, there is a meaningful relationship, but it's not maniach for the whole of Shabbos, and therefore it's maniach and manas little, and therefore it's not a relationship that matters. Now, what I'd like to do is just make one point and then sort of retoast this together. The point I want to make is that once we have defined such a narrow machlokus between Rabbizobin and the Rabbanon or Rav Nachman, in other words, don't think Rav Nachman is saying a sweeping rule that Titul on HaTsad, Shemei Titul, or Titul on HaTsad, love Shemei Titul always. It's simply a very narrow machlokus of is Titul on HaTsad, Shemei Titul, in a case where I'm not doing Neo, but equally I'm not deliberately moving it, and it's Miniach and Manas Little. We are in a bit of a mess in the Gemara, because the Gemara asks a stira in Rav Nachman here by us, and without getting ourselves too locked into the Gemara and Kuf Mem base on a base, the Gemara there asks also, it thinks it has evidence against Rav Nachman from a Mishnah. And the Chorah, there are ways to avoid all these contradictions by slightly tweaking the scenario. So, for example, Tosus argues that the whole machlokus of Nachman, how he paskins, or to put it differently, the machlokus of Rabbizobin and Tadoi, and the Rabbanon is only in a case where you are miniach and manas little. But if it was shochach, everyone would agree it's allowed. So all we would need to answer is, here Rav Nachman's talking about shochach, and he's talking about miniach and manas little. And similarly on the Mishnah in Kuf Mem Beis days, all we need to answer is that the contradiction to Rav Nachman is because it's talking about a case of shochach, not a case of manas little. So I'm not going to go into any of that simply because as it is, we're all feeling a bit overwhelmed and the sukkahs are very complicated. I'm just pointing out that this is flagged by the Achronim who sort of calculate the maths of the sukkah, that by the time you're finished with Tosfos, the scenarios are so nuanced and dark that you can avoid all steers by simply tweaking very slightly the parameters of the Shaila, because Tosfos has added in so many hidden parameters. And basically the sort of answer that they give are that it's not reasonable to assume that's the scenario. In other words, shochach isn't a reasonable scenario in the case of the mitzvah, because if you have a look at the language in the Mishnah, it doesn't sound like it's a mitzvah, and things like that. So there's no broad brushstrokes answer to these questions. Other than each case, you have to read with a lot of sensitivity to the text and the language and work out what scenarios does it sound like it's saying. So I don't want to go into that just to, we're confused enough as it is, other than to point out that according to Tosfos that it comes out such a narrow machlokas, it's a little harder to understand when the Gemara makes a big steer of things. Why couldn't tweak the parameters? Correct.
Why doesn't it give
So that's what I'm saying. Seemingly, the Gemara could have given simpler answers, and similarly on Kuf Mem based on the base, the Gemara's medayik that the Mishnah is not like Rav Nachman. Yes. Yeah, name of the local Nachman. Where is this? Okay, I'll find it later. I won't spend much valuable SheTamna on it. So, and these sorts of problems could have been resolved. We could think of attempted solutions by altering the parameters and saying the situation is different. And for whatever reason, the Gemara is not willing to say that because it doesn't think it's a good reading of the Mishnah. Let's maybe just use the last sort of 7 minutes just to learn Tosis together, and then we'll finish, and I'll just leave it as work for next Sunday when I'm not here, just to try and tidy up the maths of the sugya. And then Tuesday, Mitzvah Hashem, I'd very much like to move on to onto the next Gemara after the two dots Masechet Shabbat. So that's what we'll learn on Tuesday. Okay, let's learn Tosis together. Hi Pugla, Vim Torah. Hi Pugla Hechidomi. Iba Miniach my Talmud demand Shori Milmata Lamala. If it's Miniach, what's shot in the opinion that says that it's allowed Milmata Lamala, which according to the Mashal's reason, which the one we're going with, is another way of saying Rav Nachman, the version of Rav Nachman in which that's allowed. Hafidu Neo Lo Shori, even Neo isn't allowed because it's a bossis. Kol Shekain Titul Min HaTsad. The Iba Shochach, and if it's talking about a scenario Shochach where it's not a bossis, my Talmud demand also. What's the opinion? The way of the opinion that says it's also, or to put that differently, the alternative view of Rav Nachman. Afidu Titul Gomor Shori L'Tzorech. Even Titul Gomor is allowed when necessary. The Taltal Agav HaTsad to be Metaltal incidental of the Heta, which is the common Perek Notel, and as I said, the Kufmei Malaf and Medalef is a printing mistake. It should say Kufmei Beis and Beis. Okay, so you see over there that even Titul Gomor is allowed. What's the case? B'moy shal gabe akar b'tzorch and komoi d'ntaltzu b'oden olav, and similarly the Evan shall be chavis kshubein chavis magbia umata kolchkin Titul natzat. Okay, so in the case of Shochach, you see from that Gemara that even a Titul where I am moving Muktza via non-Muktza with intention to move the Muktza is allowed. Kavachoma here, where I'm moving Muktza via non-Muktza, where I don't care about the BaTeven and the Kash falling off. That's Tosis's question. V'yesh Shlomo says Tosis, and all of this, according to the Mashal, is a question only on this stage in the Gemara, because we're asking only on Rav Nachman because he's an Amora and shouldn't be arguing with a Mishnah. And for some reason, the Gemara is not willing to say that he is arguing against the Mishnah, or passing against the Mishnah, relying on a brisa, because that would be unusual for an Amora to do. So Tosfos answers v'yesh Loma the meniach amanas litla ayra. It's talking about a case where you meniach amanas litla. Afal gav the k'shechochach domi. Even though in many respects meniach amanas litla is like shochach in the sense that it doesn't become a bossis. Kamoi toman v'chisa b'dova she'ein litla b'sopa metoinin. In a case where you cover something over with something muktzah. The shori l'naya, you are allowed to shake it off. Mishum the ein meniach of kol Shabbos, because you haven't placed it for the whole Shabbos and therefore it isn't a bossis. So Tosfos holds that meniach amanas litol is not a bossis. Or about somis for clipping to beitza. Similarly, the case of bones and shells in beitza, the shori beisila l'salik is a tavlo l'nai. You can shake off the tablecloth or the tabletop and not worry about it being a bossis. And therefore the issue of bossis isn't around. So with respect to hilchas bossis, shochach, and meniach and manas little are identical, because in both cases it doesn't become a bossis. Nonetheless, with respect to Titul Min HaTsad, i.e. how we view your action and whether we view your action as relating to the Muktza item, there's a distinction between shochach and meniach and manas little. Mikol Mokom, nonetheless, lo laniach ba'usa inyan she starts Titul Min HaTsad. You can't or shouldn't allow Titul Min HaTsad in the case of meniach, because who asked you ever to make that connection? And therefore, since you've connected it, you can't argue that your Titul is completely irrelevant of the Muktza item because you were meniach it there. At the end of the day, you chose to place it there. And also, I want you to hear the logic of this. If it's shochach, it doesn't become a bossis because you never intended to make the under object bottle to the over object. If it's meniach amanas little, it also doesn't become a bossis because you never intended to leave it there for the whole of Shabbos. So you never negated the under object to the over object. The under object still had its own independent existence and chashivas because you're planning to take off the Muktza item on Shabbos. However, that's with respect to Hilchos Bosses. With respect to Natila, can I argue that my action is irrelevant of the Muktza item? No, because I placed the Muktza item there. I wanted it to be there. I was maniach it there. And therefore, I wanted its geographical location to be there. And the essence of tiltul or movement is altering it. So that is an act of altering a place. It wasn't like shochach, where it was place was never there. It was maniach. Its place was there. And therefore I can't argue that my tiltul and HaTsad is irrelevant of it. That's in a case as Tosfos where I had a choice. However, Atzomus and Klippin, lo mistayed alone. There's a bit of a Gesa problem here. It doesn't quite read those. He says in the case of Atzomus and Klippin, it doesn't work, or you can't have a scenario where they don't end up on the shulchan, because probably the correct way to read this is lo mistayed alone in chinu. It's not possible not to place them on the shulchan, because that's where you're eating. The Tomon, in others, this is not a meniach hamnas little in that case. It's just you're eating over there. It's not a shachach. It's not that you forgot it there, but it's equally not a meniach where I chose to make that place. I'm just eating on top of the table a non-Muktza item. A nut is not a Muktza item. The chicken is not a Muktza item. And out of the chicken or the nut emerges klippah satzamis, which are Muktza. That's not the equivalent of maniach almanas little, even though there's a maniach in it, because I'm putting the shell or the Atzomus down. I'm not making this their place. I don't really want them there. That's just that it emerges from the eating process. Yes.
Every other case is in before Shabbat.
Yes.
So how can the Klippin be? I can understand.
Okay, so for those online, Adam's asking a very important question, which is he says anyway this isn't similar because this is happening only on Shabbos. So the post can prove that Tosfos doesn't think that happening before Shabbos or on Shabbos is relevant. A big Kiddush. I don't want to go into it again because we're as it is, we're confused on Hilchos Bosses. But you are correct. There's an exciting incidental detail that you see in Tosfos, which Tosfos doesn't think that your Chiddush is significant whether it happens before Shabbos or on Shabbos, and that's a very interesting piece of news. But we're not going to focus on it for now. But yeah, a very, very fine point. Okay, so just to again say what we're saying. Tosfos says that shochach and meniach almanas little, with respect to Hilchos Bosses, are identical. In neither case did I make the under object bottle, as it were, or nullified to its purpose of being a tray for the over objects. In that respect, identical. With respect to tiltul and HaTsad, in the case of shochach, I never wanted this to be the geographical location of the Muktza. Whereas in the case of meniach, I did, albeit temporarily. So now I can't claim that my tiltul is I can't ignore in my acts of tiltul the effect it's having on the Muktza item. Says Tosfos, now let's consider the case of klippin and atzomus, shells and bones. Superficially, it looks like a maniach because I am putting them down there. But if you think with a clarity of thought, you realize it's not really a maniach because I'm interested in engaging with my chicken or with my nut. It happens to be that the shell or the bones then are left over and they have to go somewhere, but I'm not specifying a place for them. Just while I'm eating, that's where they get put down. And therefore, in that case, that's more like a shachach with respect to the halachas of tiltul and HaTsad. And therefore, when I'm moving the table, it's just incidental that these are being moved. Then finally, the last word Tosfos says is that even in a case where I have been maniach, if nior is possible, that's even less. And he says, "But Toman the kiss of the perik by melatonin." In a case where I cover something over with Muktza, ein lochash. You don't need to worry that you're doing so with Muktza and find a non-Muktza item to do it with. Given to esha b'nior, since nior is possible, you can just literally throw it off. Afilu tiltul and HaTsad eno. This is even less than tiltul and HaTsad, and therefore that's completely allowed. So basically, to summarize. When you want to work out the halacha in these cases, according to Tosfos, you do need to think through two stages. You need to work out, has it become a bosses, has it become muktza in its own right? And number two, is there tiltul and HaTsad? But when you think about tiltul and HaTsad, you can't just look at the action you're doing, or even the intention in the action you're doing. You also have to look at what relationship have I made previously between the muktza and the non-muktza item. That's the summary of the chiddush of this very difficult Tosfos, and I hope I've given everyone enough to do on Sunday when I'm away in just working out the maths of Tosfos and the Nomdus, and then in Mitzvah on Tuesday we'll start the next sugya.
Yeah.
Okay, good everyone. Fine, thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very quick question. Can I ask a very quick
Yes,
question?
yeah.
I'm assuming a small point, but when we're talking about leaving something on, but with the intention of taking the Muktza item off on Shabbos, it's you're allowed to take it off on Shabbos from Sorech Makomo. Is that what we're saying?
If it's a Klisha melachot issa, then yes. If it's Muktza machmas kufa, then no.
So if you got the intention to take it off on Shabbos and you're not allowed to, how does that help?
For example, in a case where you can take it off, like a Klisha melachot issa, or some other means, like if Neo would be possible, or the like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or yeah, maybe that would be okay. Yeah. Okay. Have a good evening. Bye.
Okay.